2 days ago, it was the 80th anniversary of D-Day. That is the name given to the Allied landings in Normandy, which would then lead to the liberation of the rest of Europe from Nazi control in the Second World War. 5 beaches were assaulted on D-Day by American, British and Canadian forces. However, in reality, many more nationalities took part in these battles. The most obvious, of course, are the French. Both Free French forces and indeed the French resistance fighting behind German lines helped to make the plan a success. Other than that, the forces fighting for the British were the most diverse in terms of the number of nationalities involved. Of course, Britain had a colonial empire, and so airmen and other servicemen from South Africa, Rhodesia, that's today's Zimbabwe, Australia and New Zealand were also involved in various capacities. At the same time, many of the nations that had been occupied by the Germans earlier in the war, such as Poles, Czechoslovaks, Belgians, Norwegians and Greeks, were also involved fighting under British direction with the aim of at one point being able to liberate their own homelands from the Germans and their allies. However, in this video I would like to talk about the Dutch. It will not come as a big surprise to you, but the Dutch did also play a role in D-Day. So today I want to find out what was that role? What did the Dutch do on D-Day? First, let's take a look at the broader Dutch role in the Second World War. The Netherlands was neutral up until 1940 when the Germans invaded. After several days of resistance by the Dutch army, the German Luftwaffe bombed the second largest city of Rotterdam to the ground. Following this, they threatened to do the same with Amsterdam, and Dutch forces realized that fighting any more would be hopeless, and so they surrendered to German forces on the 15th of May, while more fighting continued in the province of Zeeland as part of the broader Battle of France. However, before this had happened, the plan for the Germans hadn't exactly gone entirely as they had wanted. In fact, the German attack on Den Haag, involving many paratroopers, was beaten back by the Dutch, incurring several hundreds of casualties on the Germans and taking over 1,000 prisoners too. More importantly, however, for Dutch morale, it stopped the German plan of capturing the royal family at their residence and meant that they were able to escape to safety in England, from where they could continue the fight. Now, as I mentioned in my video about the role of the Dutch Navy in the Second World War, several Dutch Navy ships and many Dutch naval personnel would go on to fight with the British in the North Atlantic and the North Sea. It's in this capacity that Dutch ships would also fight on D-Day. The numbers involved were some 13 torpedo boats, 20 merchant vessels being used, about half of them as tugboats and others in other capacities, and there were 2 gunboats employed as well. These 2 gunboats, something more is known about. These were the HRMS Flores and the HRMS Sumba. These 2, there is actual footage of them fighting at D-Day, which I'll show a little clip of what they did.
Dat mag ons, want wij kenden maar al te goed de kunde en ervaring van onze mensen, opgedaan bij vorige operaties. Hun popelende harten en de vastbeslotenheid waarmee deze opdracht van het opperbevel zo volledig mogelijk zou worden uitgevoerd. Ons schip, al een dame op leeftijd, had verschillende littekens overgehouden, maar was nog uitstekend geschikt voor haar taak. Kwamen wij bij het krieken van de dag voor Arromanches aan. Er stond een matige bries en het was licht heilig. Uitkijken was ieders wachtwoord, maar eigenlijk hadden we geen ogen genoeg. Door het geweldige aantal schepen was het voortdurend oppassen geen aanvaringen te maken. Daar gaan de kanons omhoog. Het kan nu niet lang meer duren. Op de pas! Boren dicht! Ja! Honderden salvo's werden gevuurd. En waarom dat we het kregen? Vuur! Of honger of dorst. We waren te druk bezig, want we wilden niet falen waar Nederland op ons wachtte. Op ons lettende schip. En niet Nederland alleen. Daar ging de onafzienbare stroom van landingsvaartuigen, schepen, groot en klein, tot de nok bemand en gevuld met de onverschrokken soldaten van het bevrijdingsleger. Ook zij letten op ons. De geallieerde marines hadden beloofd hen te beschermen bij hun overtocht en hun eerste schreden aan wal. En van die marines maakten wij deel uit. We waren maar met z'n tweeën, Sumba en de Flores. Het was weinig, maar daarom moest het dubbel goed zijn. En het was goed, omdat de Koninklijke Marine gemaakt is door Nederlanders, uit Nederlanders, voor Nederlanders.
The Sumba and the Flores were so effective at bombarding the German positions in an absolute relentless barrage that other British and Commonwealth troops on board other ships saw them and nicknamed them the Terrible Twins. As they said in the video, there were only two of them, so they were only few, but that meant that we had to do it well. That's what they said at the end of the video, and I thought that was quite an important and touching sentiment to the smaller nations who contributed on D-Day. It wasn't just the Navy, however. There were also Dutch airmen involved on D-Day, particularly 320 Squadron, which was the Dutch squadron of the RAF at the time. Some of these had actually flown over after the end of the Battle of the Netherlands. They realized the Dutch army was about to capitulate, so they flew their planes over to Britain and said, okay, we're going to join in the RAF, and they had been fighting the war with the British RAF since then. This is a picture of one of the bombers of 320 Squadron actually on D-Day. The bombing of Normandy, of course, happened the night before, so the night of the 5th of June. And here are members of that squadron being addressed by General Eisenhower. They suffered very heavy casualties on D-Day, with 12 crews going out on the night of the 5th. The next day, only 4 of these crews would actually return, meaning that around 25 airmen of the 320th Squadron were killed in action. The infantry were also involved, but this is more after the end of D-Day, so in the later landings after the beachheads had already been secured. And this was in the form of the Royal Netherlands Motorized Infantry Brigade, or as they became known during the war, the Prinses Irene Brigade, being named after the granddaughter of the Dutch Queen, the current Princess Irene of the Dutch royal family. This was basically the remnants of the Dutch army that were able to get over the channel, as well as other Dutchmen who volunteered not only from the Netherlands, but also those Dutch people who had already emigrated to the United States and Canada, New Zealand, Australia, as well as many in South Africa who wanted to volunteer with the Dutch armed forces, given the historic connection between those nations. They received training in England to become part of the British Army and to fight in this Dutch unit when they would go over the channel, which of course they would do, but after D-Day, after the beaches had been secured. They would land on Normandy shores on the 8th of August and very soon would become embroiled in fighting in northern France around Arromanches, which is where they came on land. Another interesting fact actually at Arromanches is that several Allied ships were scuttled to create a kind of bridge so that the tides weren't as strong, and one of the old Dutch warships that was long overdue being scrapped, the Sumatra, was actually scrapped as part of that to help in that effort. Not quite a glorious moment really, but I mean, I guess it's also a contribution there, which is worth mentioning. But anyway, the Prinses Irene Brigade then was also involved after D-Day had been done and the later fighting through France. They would also fight through Belgium and of course be involved in the liberation of the Netherlands when it came that far, as we can see here in this picture. And it's actually as part of the Prinses Irene Brigade that the last surviving Dutchman who was involved at D-Day, Max Wolff, should be mentioned, because he was there 2 days ago at Arromanches at the commemoration of D-Day, here seen with many other servicemen currently serving in the Dutch armed forces. And it's important to mention his story because his is a very interesting and indeed a very tragic story, because Max Wolff was a Dutch Jew. He was born and lived in Arnhem, but in 1941 his house was requisitioned by the SS and he and his family had to go into hiding, which they would do for the next several years. They tried to escape to neutral Switzerland, but on the way his sister and various other family members were caught and later murdered by the Germans in Auschwitz. He, however, managed to escape and managed to make his way to Normandy, where in June of 1944 the Allied Allies would land. He decided that he wanted to fight back, so he made the connection with Allied forces, and when the Prinses Irene Brigade landed, he joined them and would help them with the liberation of the Netherlands several months later.
Oh. Vaandel af. Rechts wenken. Mars.
Toutes les félicitations de notre gouvernement, de la France et en particulier du ministre de l'Europe et des Affaires étrangères qui nous concerne. Merci.
Alright everyone, thank you very much for watching this video on what the Dutch did during D-Day and a little bit of after D-Day as well. Let me know in the comments, did you know that there were any Dutchmen involved in D-Day? I must say I was aware that there were a few. I knew about the Prinses Irene Brigade, but not so much about the two gunboats that were involved and that they had this nickname of the Terrible Twins, and certainly not about Max Wolff and his story and the fact that he is the last remaining Dutchman who was involved with D-Day and more broadly, I suppose, with the Normandy Landings and the fighting that took place in 1944. So I would like to dedicate this video to everyone who fought, everyone who served, who made it possible to defeat this terrible evil that was in the Second World War, and yeah, everyone who's working for the good in the world today. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hartstikke bedankt, and I will see you in the next one. Links to things will be in the comments below if you'd like to check things out more.